How we're starting. So training and pruning fruit trees. And by the way, come next week, Owen Dell's an old buddy of mine. We go back pretty near 50 years. We both started our career in Santa Barbara as landscape contractors, and Owen went on to be a landscape architect, and I went to work managing the city park system there. It was fun to reconnect back here in Corvallis, and so come and hear his talk. He's very entertaining as well as smart. So how many rely on YouTube? Come on, be honest. I look there for all kinds of stuff. If I'm doing some woodworking project or something, I don't know how to do it, make a certain jig and stuff. There's all kinds of cool stuff. And if you look up fruit tree pruning, you'll find all kinds of stuff from England, Australia, from anywhere in the country, tropical climates. There's all kinds of good information out there, but you got to be selective with what you see on YouTube. But you can get some stuff. I'm drawing my knowledge here from 50 years experience as a horticulturalist, but also as a board certified master arborist in the study of what happens when you prune anything. There's a physiological response, and you need to understand that response before you take those pruners and lop something off. There's a reaction, and you want it to be favorable in your favor, not against what you're trying to accomplish. So you can get some good stuff on YouTube. Resources that I'm going to draw on here, and if you want to jot these down, you can. One is this book, and it was produced in the 1950s, How to Prune Fruit Trees by Sanford Martin. I don't suppose he's still around, but they're republishing this book. You can get it on Amazon. And I bought this book in college, and in winters, I would do fruit tree pruning and did landscape work, earned my way through college. And when I got back to Santa Barbara and started my business up in Santa Barbara, that was the book I used to know how to, approach every kind of fruit tree. And I was pleased to see it still in production, and it's simple. It breaks it down very simple. Some of these big pruning books you get, and there's like pages after pages, and you get kind of lost in it. That's just a real good how-to. So if you're into books, that's a good one. Another resource is Training and Pruning Your Home Orchard. This is the OSU's publication 400. You can download that for free. I think it was last updated in 2011. It's by Jeff Olson. So that is a real go-to, and it's free. And another book I'll be talking about this Saturday at Insights is the Grow a Little Fruit Tree. I was giving a talk about growing fruit trees in small spaces and hadn't even discovered this book yet. And so I was out at the grassroots book table at Insights and found this book. And so if you're into growing fruit trees in small spaces, how many have small spaces, smaller yards? Most of us don't have acreage and farms and things like that. Excellent book, and it's based on a principle we're going to talk about here called backyard orchard culture. It's a lot of syllables there, but it's backyard orchard culture. Remember that. Our company does, Homegrown Gardens does fruit tree management programs. We do pruning in the winter and in the summer. How many do summer pruning? How many understand the importance of summer pruning? You will when I get done. Okay, so winter pruning and summer pruning, but also spray programs. How many do dormant spraying and spray their trees? Okay. Also in season, if you got codling moth problems or you got problems with apple scab or peach leaf curl, all those kind of things you want to control. And we use mostly products that are organic or approved for organic gardening, very low toxic, as well as we're getting more and more into soil treatments, doing soil analysis and coming in and doing treatments into soil, mostly focused on biology, so your trees are as healthy as possible. We're adding fungi, bacteria, particularly mycorrhizal fungus inoculants, organic fertilizers, sometimes nutrients. We often find there's a calcium deficiency. And if you're trying to grow apples, there's a thing called bitter pit. Who's heard of bitter pit? Real common. It looks almost like apple scab if you don't know, or look, a codling moth got in there, but it's calcium deficiency. So we do those programs. It's a little commercial. This is our motley crew of our guys. And some of them have been with us 18 years, and some of them are just brand new there, but we just did that last week. So why do we train fruit trees? Training develops a strong tree structure that can support heavy crops without limb breakage. How many have had limbs break off their trees? Okay, it's preventable. How many prop up their branches because they're so heavy laden? You shouldn't have to prop up your limbs. But if you have to, I guess it's good to do that. Training helps bring a young tree into production. That's the whole point. Having a fruit tree is to get fruit, right? And get your branching low. For those in small spaces, you want your branching low, right? So why do we prune fruit trees? Reduce the overall size of the trees. That's the main thing, right? Size, not the main thing. But it makes the trees easier to spray and to harvest. You can reach things. You're not having to get up on 12-foot ladders. You can reach it on the ground. Pruning young trees can improve the structural strength and induce branching. Structural strength, so you're not having branches breaking out, and inducing the branches the direction you want them to go. If you want the center in that tree to be open, you're not allowing things to grow into the tree, you're letting them grow out from the tree. Pruning mature trees can increase their production and improve fruit quality. If you don't know where the fruit's born and you start pruning that wood off, are you going to get the fruit? It happens. So you need to know where the fruit's going to come so you protect that wood and develop that wood. Pruning reduces the need to prop up fruit-laden trees. Just said that. And pruning opens the center for air movement and allows sunlight to the lower foliage. That's another reason for summer pruning. You get all this growth way up here and it's shading everything down here. In a forest, if you notice the trees in a forest, you get in the middle of a forest, you look straight up, and 100 feet up, there's no branches or limbs until way up there because they get shaded and the tree naturally just drops those off, and your fruit tree will do the same thing. If you're shading that lower part of the tree, it's going to eventually die. It's not going to produce the fruit you want. So there's an art and a science in horticulture and in pruning. So there's a physiological response you need to understand, and a lot of this is art. If you hired 5 different people to prune a fruit tree, they're all going to probably go at it a little bit different. But if they all produce the fruit, what's the big deal, right? But you're going to get different people have different schools of thought on it. But the trees are always going to react the same way. That's predictable. So basic terminology. Now, hopefully I don't bore you with that, but that terminology is right out of this handbook here. So if you're into that, it's good to have that as a reference. A branch collar, it's the raised tissue at the base of every branch. It contains the specialized cells that seal off the pruning wounds from wood, rot, fungi. Trees do not heal. Some people don't realize that, but trees and woody plants do not heal. They compartmentalize. And if you breach that barrier, that's a natural barrier, you introduce rot to that tree. Back in the olden days, prior to the 1980s, before this guy named Alex Shigo came on the scene and retrained arborists all around the world, they would do what they call flush cuts and cut it past this. And I'll show you a slide in a minute where that is. And every time they do that, you'd introduce rot into that tree and just shorten the life of that tree. So you don't want to do that. Crotch angle, that's just the angle of the branching right there. The crown, now in a large shade tree, the crown is what's up here, the whole top of the tree. When we're talking fruit trees, the crown is going to be what's at the base, right at the ground. Heading cut is a cut that removes only part of a branch. So if I were to take this whip, comes up out of a pear tree, and it's going straight up, and I cut it off right there, that's a heading cut. That's just kind of lopping it off. A lateral branch is a shoot off another branch, and so, again, if this is your main leader, that's a lateral branch coming off the side there. Usually they're smaller in diameter. A leader is the uppermost portion of a scaffold limb. In the central leader trained tree, we have a central leader like a Christmas tree, you just have one. But if it's a more of a candelabra tree where you have many branches, 3 to 5, each one of those will have a central leader. A scaffold limb is a large limb that forms the tree's framework. And in a young tree, that's what you're developing. You're thinking about which branches are going to be the scaffold branches, and you're working to develop those branches. A shoot is the length of a branch growth in one season. And that's what I held up here before off this pear tree. It's off my son's pear tree. I was looking for things as demonstration of lopping on his trees. And that's off a pear tree. And that's a shoot. That's 1 year growth. Oftentimes in a mature apple tree, you'll get 7, 8 feet long whips that come up. That's a shoot, one season. Depends on the vigor of the tree. And a spur is a short shoot that bears fruit. Again, going back to this pear, this is 1 year old, and it's just now starting to form. On year 2, those are going to turn into fruit spurs. Pears and apples bear on fruit spurs that last for many, many years, and you want to respect that. I did have one client, we were doing this class at the nursery, and as soon as I said that, I heard a big moan because she had just didn't know what those little spurs were and cut them all off. No apples that year. Hey, a stub is a short portion of a branch left after pruning cut. You want to avoid stubs, but you don't want to cut so far in past what's called the collar. Okay, so you're going to leave a little bit of a stub. Better to leave a little bit of a stub than to cut too far in and permanently damage that tree. A sucker sprout is 1 year old shoot that's grown from the root, and generally those are from the root stock. Most fruit trees are grafted. Fig trees, pretty much not. And so that might be off the parent plant, and they will produce fruit, but otherwise those suckers will not produce fruit. You want to keep those managed. The terminal is the end of any shoot. And if you understand plant physiology, whenever you have a terminal shoot, they produce a hormone up here called auxin. You've heard this story? And this one tells the other ones not to grow. Sends that down the phloem and tells it not to grow. As soon as you cut it off, that communication stops and it starts to grow down here. That's the physiology, predictable when you do a cut. And a thinning cut is a pruning cut that removes an entire branch from its point of origin. So rather than like this one where I have these branches and I do a heading cut here, if I take it clear down to here, it's a thinning cut. Or if I'm trying to open the center of a tree, I'd probably take the center one out. And a vertical branch is a branch that is grown upright, just like those. And a water sprout is a 1 year old shoot that grows within the tree. And I often call them whips. So if I start saying whips, that's what I'm talking about is the water sprouts. So the branch collar, this pointer doesn't work on this screen, so I can't. So this is, this is the main trunk. This is the branch. Right here is the branch bark ridge. It looks kind of like it's kind of got crinkled bark in there. And then the branch collar is here. And you want to protect that. So when you're making a cut, it's always 3 cuts, right? You make a bottom cut, upper cut, drop that all the weight off. Then you can come back without that weight on and cut off here so you don't get that bark peeling back and damaging that tree. But you don't want to cut back into here because now you've introduced rot into that tree. Branches look like this on the inside. They anchor well down inside the trunk. And so when you reach that, you're getting into the heart of that tree. And that's what you get. When you see that kind of thing happening on your trees, any woody tree, it's probably because it was cut too close down into the heart of that tree. This is right out of this guide here. So again, we got the leaders up here. You got multiple scaffold branches, the leader, scaffold limb, secondary scaffold limb, all these whips that want to come out, water sprouts, the crown, crotches, and sucker sprout. Off usually the rootstock. Let's talk about tools. How many have the right tools? you should all be raising your hands. You always want to have the right tools. My father was a carpenter and he always taught me, when you have a wood chisel, you keep it sharp and you use it for what? Wood. Saws, you keep it and you take care of it and you keep it oiled and you keep it sharp and the right tool for the right job. Same thing with pruning. So you want to have the right tools. So you got hand bypass pruners. I'll go through this quick here. I got some photos here. Loppers, long reach pruner. How many have long reach pruners? Good. Makes it easy, doesn't it? I didn't bring any today. Hand saw. So this is bypass pruners, the preferred. How many have bypass pruners? Okay, good job. My favorite is the Felco. They all have Felcos. If you're going to do this for a lifetime, and if you do more than a few fruit trees every year, the difference in using a Felco, even over the Corona, which is a knockoff, and they're pretty good, is immense. They're light and they're sharp, replaceable parts on them. Lasts a lifetime. If not, you can replace the parts on the Felco as well as the Coronas. Then the old-fashioned drop forge. I still have a few pair around at the nursery. I keep one by my desk when I'm going out pruning. I'll often grab that to keep them sharp. They work fine. They're just heavier if you're going to do it all day, do some serious pruning. Loppers, this is my standard 26-inch. I can cut up to 1.5 inches. I like the wood handle, so I like the flex of it a little better. Although if you're too strong, some of my young guys that work for us, I don't know what they're thinking. Get the saw. No, I can do it. Snap. They break these off. Pole pruners. Now, if you're keeping your trees small, you really don't need this, do you? But sometimes we inherit a big old apple tree that hasn't been pruned in years and we're working on that thing. So it's handy to have them. Long range pruners, the standard ones we use are 7 feet long. You can get them 4 feet long, 6, or extendable. This is a more industrial type because you can cut up to 3/4 inch. Some of the other ones you can only cut up 1/2 inch. They have types that are cut and hold, so you can cut the limb and then just drop it in a pile. Real handy. And long reach loppers, so you're doing some bigger cuts out in the center of the tree. You can stand in there and reach like this and get into the tree without getting on a ladder. Hand saw, this is my standard silky saw that I just strap it on, and it's a straight blade, so I can cut up to 3-inch branches on that if I have to. I do carry a chainsaw for that. Makes it easier, but and then a folding saw. What I like about the folding saws is I can keep it right in my back pocket. I can pull it out. It's too big to do with my hand pruners. I don't want to run and get my loppers, and I can just open that up and I can cut that off and put it back in my pocket. Okay. How many use pruning ceiling? Stop. Another thing that Alex Shigo, who is a research Forest Service arborist, and he spent his career with a chainsaw dissecting trees and understanding tree biology, and he revolutionized the arboriculture industry. He taught us not to top trees, for one. And the arborist will tell you, don't top trees, right? And he also taught us not to seal our wounds because we're sealing in decay. So don't do that anymore. Okay, maintenance of your equipment, real quick. I carry just a diamond little file here. That's what that one is too. And at least once a day, I hone that blade, get it just sharp. I can feel it on my thumb. Keep it sharp, makes it easier. 3-in-1 oil. That's good, just a couple drops on there once a day. And WD-40, I always carry that because it, one, helps to clean off the sap, a little steel wool, and keeps the moisture from rusting those tools. WD-40 is not a lubricant per se. That's why the oil is important. It will loosen them up, but it's not intended to be a lubricant. Sterilizing your tools, if you're doing like we do, go from one, orchard to another, you don't want to take diseases from here to there. You want to sterilize your or from tree to tree, especially dealing with cherry trees and some of the bacterial diseases they get. So use some 10% bleach. This is what we use is alcohol, 99%. Usually the stuff you buy at the store is like 70.
And we sometimes just put it in a little spray bottle. Question?
Spray them with Lysol.
You can use Lysol, disinfectants, as another way to go. Now, if you had enough pruning to do, you might want to soak it, not just dip it. And have like 2 pruners, let one soak and trade them off to make sure you're penetrating into that tool and not carrying any spores around that go from one tree to another. So that's important. Okay, now back to training. When you're getting a young tree from the nursery, it's the first thing you do. Okay? How many have done that? Why would you do that? Get the branching down low. Okay, so oftentimes you'll go to the nursery, and my son's up in in Portland right now, picking up all the our bare root fruit trees for the nursery. He puts them all out. And they're like different sizes, but up here, and they start coming up and they're branching about up into here, which is fine. But you want your branching to start down low, right? Especially if you're trying to cram stuff into small spaces. Get your branching down low so you can maintain the tree maybe this height and have branching clear to the ground and get all that area producing fruit. So this is a standard way of you be training a tree. You plant the tree, and this is out of this guide here too, on the OSU guide. Cut it off, then it starts to get that candelabra effect, and then you cut it again and keep branching it as it matures. That's probably a 2-year process to get to that point. So you're going to cut it off, it regrows, and that summer you hit it again and let it keep kind of getting that look to it. I had a client the other day in one of the classes. She was wanting to do her trees in espalier, so she was interested in doing that. That's kind of fun. I've seen people do it. Takes a little effort and time, but you can train them as espalier, was flat up against the wall. South or west walls are best, so you get the maximum sun. Vase shape, which we talked about, and central leader type, which is often used or mostly used for dwarfing root stocks, like on apples. Other than that, I don't see it used a lot. Don't do it myself, but it is a practice out there. You'll see it sometimes in the new way they're doing fruit tree orchards where they're planting in hedgerows and they're growing trees up and narrow, kind of that deal. So training, I've got one of these devices up here, a little plastic spacer that you can put on to pull your branches apart in a young tree to get that angle, that crotch open, 45 degrees or more. There's other devices you can buy, like this one here, where you can take that branch and kind of bend it to go more out this way as opposed to up that way. I was doing that the other day on some fruit trees and bent a little too far and it snapped off on me. So you got to be careful. So that's handy. So what you see here is sometimes you can make them out of wood. This is one of the plastic ones here. There's one here, one up here. There's like 3 or 4 of them on that poor little tree. And I think my son did that. He just had a stick of wood, stuck it in there. And this is one of the metal braces there. So you want to train that tree to kind of go out. And you'll see that especially when you buy these 4-in-1. Anyone have a 4-in-1 fruit tree? You'll see that they get kind of crowded. You want to get those branching out and keep the centers open. And when they come from the nursery, they tend to grow right up and get a crowded center. You got to work on that to get the growth outside that center. Okay, mature sizes of standard rootstocks. I'm not talking about semi-dwarfing or dwarfing rootstocks, but an apple tree wants to be 30 feet tall, okay, or more. Apricots, 15 to 20 feet. Figs, 15 to 20. Now 20 feet, so I'm 6 feet. What's the ceiling here, maybe 12? Okay, so 20 feet is pretty tall, right? Even 12 feet. It's more than 12 feet. What is that, 15 maybe? I don't know. Peaches, 12 to 15. Plums, 18 to 20. Pears, 18 to 20. Sweet cherries, 35 to 40. I don't know how many times I've had someone say, oh man, I planted a cherry 10 years ago, and now all the fruit's way up there, and I'm way down here, and I can't get it. The birds get it all. Well, it's a little late. You might want to start over. So, backyard orchard culture.
How many have heard that term? Okay. It was coined by, at the bottom down here, davewilson.com. It's a nursery in Central California that coined the phrase, and I learned it from their sales rep, Ed Lavo. I got his picture in here, I think, somewhere. But the objective is the prolonged harvest of tree-ripe fruit from a small space. So here's Ed in the little orchard down there, and he's a short guy. So they haven't pruned this tree yet, and so that's probably going to be about 7 foot, maybe 6, 7 foot tree. And you can see where he's standing. How many trunks do you see? Yeah, there's 4 trees there, planted 18 inches apart. It means you plant them close together, several or many fruit varieties which ripen at different times. So if you want fruit, so apples, you want some to bring fruit early, mid, and late, you mix them together. Also, you can then get your pollinators mixed in there, so you make sure you've got your own pollinators without taking up lots and lots of space. And then you do summer pruning. Summer pruning. Now, if that guy's 6 foot tall, how tall is that tree?
5.
Okay, you can reach that fruit. Okay, so size matters. How many? Well, I can see those little gray hair in here. So you're about my age, right? My wife doesn't let me get on ladders anymore. I can't get and clean my roof anymore. I have to get my crew over to do it. Why? It hurts when you fall. You don't bounce anymore. You kind of splat, and you don't want to be that person. So backyard orchard culture again, the only way to keep most fruit trees under 12 feet or 30 feet or 40 feet is by pruning, and the most practical method of pruning is summer pruning. The key to size control is summer pruning. Okay, and it's not real finesse. You're just bringing down the height. You do it about midsummer, there's still time to get a little bit of regrowth for winter. Also, that's going to reduce the amount of those whips it sends up every spring, because you're cutting down on some of the carbohydrate reserves stored in that tree because you're cutting off photosynthetic material. You're also allowing sunlight down into that tree to those lower branches. You have a question?
You can't do that before they fruit, can you?
You can.
You can.
Generally, you're going to do it about the time you'd normally thin the fruit.
Yeah.
August, depending on the fruit tree. Yeah. Yep.
What about figs are later?
Sorry?
Figs.
Figs, same thing. Figs bear on what kind of wood?
New.
Yeah, current season growth. Okay, so if you cut it back today and it regrows and has fruit this summer, it's on that wood that was developed, not last year's wood. So you can hit those pretty hard and get that wood to come, you know. We'll talk about that. So backyard orchard culture, the tree size is your responsibility. Okay, you buy that tree, plant it, cut it off, let it regrow, train that branching, and keep it low. So a standard apple, like I said, is 25 feet, a semi-dwarf rootstock, because most of the trees we sell at the nursery are semi-dwarf. We do sometimes some dwarfing ones, but generally semi-dwarf, and that'll reduce it down to maybe 20 feet from 25. So it's not a lot of reduction, right? And a dwarfing rootstock, depending on which one you use, will get it to 9 to 12 feet. It's still too tall. Okay, so even if you get a dwarf apple, my son has a dwarf apple. I don't know what rootstock it's on because there's different ones. And man, that thing produced apples. It's a 4-in-1. And I was just looking at this morning, it's only about this tall, and the thing just produces just tons and tons of apples. And so going to the dwarf rootstocks, there is some advantage in doing that in some of the backyard orchard culture. So don't rule that out. Although generally in fruit production, by and large, some of the dwarfing rootstocks are bred to be small. The other rootstocks are bred to be disease resistant and other characteristics that are favorable. And so your tree is going to be stronger in the root system. I've seen some of the dwarfing ones have a weak root system where the whole tree kind of rocks like this. It's not well anchored. That's okay. So you want to be up on that ladder or on the ground? What size do you want your trees to be? 6 foot, 8 foot, 12 foot? Nah, I think 6 foot to me, probably big enough. How far do you want to fall off the ladder? You know? How many have an orchard ladder? I got one. We were out pruning for someone out, a farmer out in Junction City. He's a big grass seed farmer, a whole crew doing a big pruning thing out there. And I got one tree, I was helping him for a little bit, and it wasn't fruit trees, it was a boulevard cypress. And finally I had to get a ladder to get up in that thing. And I'm thinking the whole time, hope my wife doesn't see me up on this ladder. So it's all about the wood, where that fruit is born. You need to understand that. So apples bear on spurs that last many years. Usually you'll get a whip that comes out up the first year, there won't be any fruit on it. The next year there will be, generally. Okay, it's a second year, and then it'll produce for years and years and years and years. Eventually that thing gets kind of old and kind of spent. You got to then go in and do some reconstructive work, rejuvenating that tree and developing more fruiting wood. So you got to be watching for that in an old tree that's just kind of spent, and developing new fruiting wood. Apples are very vigorous, and Ross Penhaligon, he was the fruit specialist a few years back, and I was listening to him one day, and he says, you could take an old apple tree and just take a chainsaw and cut it off and rejuvenate it just that way. And just start retraining that tree. You can't do that with the peach or plum or other things quite so well. Pears also have fruit spurs that last many years. Plums and prunes bear on spurs from 2 years and older. So this is off a plum tree here, a Japanese plum, which is a little different than the European plums. And this was grown 2 years ago. These little ones here were last year's, and I'm seeing fruit spurs. I'm going to get some flowers and fruit off that. Well, not this branch because I cut it off, but the rest that were left. Peaches bear on 1-year-old wood. Peaches, I was at a client's house and looking at their fruit trees one day and saw their peach tree, and there's only one branch coming out of it, and it's probably been there for 15 years, and all the rest of them had broken off. Basically ruined that peach tree. They hadn't been pruning it. And so because the new wood is always further and further and further out, and that's where the fruit's going to be, it got heavy and all the branches broke out. There's just one little branch coming out at a funny angle. The whole tree was destroyed because it wasn't pruned and the fruit got too far out. 1-year-old wood. Figs bear on current season. Some of the black figs also bear on older wood. Oh, in fact, I've got one down here. That's off my Negroni fig, I think, or a Desert King, I can't remember. But you can see some of these that came on late last year. That was all, this was 2-year-old wood, that's 1-year-old wood, and that's where the fruit's born. Mummified fruit, no. Apricots bear on 1-year-old wood and older, and there's some spur development. Similar to a peach, but maybe more like a plum, kind of its own thing. Persimmons, how many have persimmons? I had a persimmon in my house in Santa Barbara. It had, one side was grafted with the hachia, which is the big astringent, and then the other part was the Japanese, the fuyu, which is the non-astringent. Anyway, it was very, very productive. So much, I'd have 70 of those plastic grocery bags we used to use. That's a lot to get rid of, give away. So I'm going to prune the bejeebers out of it this year, so I have less fruit. Well, guess what? I forgot it bears on current season growth, and I had more fruit. So you got to know where the fruit comes. Grapes bear on current. How many have grapes? They're easy to prune. It's hard to go wrong. But they bear on current season growth as well. Cherries bear on older wood from short spurs. Blueberries bear on 1-year-old like a peach, just like a peach. Blackberries bear on last year's growth. So you have a cane that grows up vegetatively this year, and that's going to fruit. So if it grew up last year, it's going to bear fruit this year. At the end of the year, you cut that off and you keep that cycle going. Same thing with raspberries.
Currants?
Yeah, question?
What about currants?
Currants are, I think, they're getting mostly on older wood. Yeah, just looking at where the flowers and fruit is born, it's gonna be older. I don't think it's probably like 2 years and older. Mhm. If in doubt, look it up. Don't be afraid to, grab a book and go, how does that work again? I've bought a few of those for the crew they can carry in the truck so they can look it up. So again, that's the point of that slide was just look to see where your fruit is born. 1-year-old wood, spurs, so forth and so on. This is on Kiger Island. I was driving through there, we were doing some work, and then this farmer there has whole, I don't know how many acres of peaches he has, but he was about halfway done. As you can see on the left, they're pruned. On the right, they hadn't got to them yet. Branches are still on the ground. They had a big pile over here where they're gonna probably burn them or something. But when you do a peach tree, you're gonna take out as much as 2/3 of last year's growth. A lot. Because you're always encouraging new growth because that's where the fruit's born. But if you get too much, then you overbear it and you got broken limbs. So this is the whips at an apple tree. I'm trying to figure if that's me up on the tree or where that is, but real aggressive trying to get, so this tree is maybe, well, here's when it's after it's pruned, but it's maybe 8 feet tall. It's going to train to go out like this, and there's a way to do that. And in some of the literature from OSU, you can get how to do that. It wants to get 30 feet tall. It's fighting you all the time. So you got to get up there. So go back here. So you're taking out all these whips, and then next year it does it all over again, right? So if you go through and summer prune that, so you don't have, so if that was summer pruned, it would be cut off right here. And you got maybe just as many, but they'll be easier to get to, and you've allowed sunlight to get down into that tree for the rest of that tree. And you've cut off some of the photosynthetic material. Again, it's going in with a little less storage and a little less aggressive regrowth come next spring. And for old apple trees, there's a publication, I think it's EC 1005, Pruning to Restore an Old Neglected Apple Tree. So you can download that. It's handy if you got an old tree that you need to rejuvenate. It's a good publication to have. So this is an apple tree that was pruned heavily, and this is about 3 years later. You'd asked a question, or someone asked a question, if they prune their trees every year. You got to do them every year. You can't skip a year. You can't skip 5 years. I don't know how many times we get called in, and so they haven't been pruned for years and years. Well, now you're into reconstruction. And to fix it, you got to get on a 4 or 5 year program to get it back on track. So you got to keep it up every year. You can't skip a year. So this was kind of a mess. All those little spurs, even though it's, a young, or newer growth in the last 5 years, the production of the apples on this is phenomenal. Yeah.
Is there a safe, percentage you can take off a tree?
Well, in arboriculture, there's a standard. This is a general rule. Fruit trees are kind of an exception. You never remove more than 25 to 25% of the biomass of a plant at one time because the physiological response is adverse. So you always try to manage to that. But that's not always the case with fruit trees, because with fruit trees, you're managing them for different purpose for fruit, like peaches, 2/3, that's 66%. So you're breaking that rule, but it's for a specific purpose.
2/3 of previous year's. growth.
Correct. So you're not taking, yeah, good point. So that answer your question on,
Would you repeat what you just said?
you repeat your question for the,
I didn't hear.
okay.
What was it? Your response was yes, and I didn't hear the question.
Oh.
Was it your question? I'm sorry.
My addition was, you were talking about 2/3 of the current year's growth, and he was talking about the percentage of the whole tree thing.
Right, so you're.
Yeah, we were talking about percentage of how much you can take off a tree before it's too much. And in general, most pruning of a shrub or a regular tree would be 25%. You go past that, you're starting to really adversely affect the physiology of the plant. Fruit trees, it kind of depends. Like, I'll show some slides here. It'll be shocking on some espaliered fig trees where you're taking off tons because you want current season growth. And so for fruit trees, It depends on the tree. That's the answer to that. Depends on the tree, because it's all about fruit production. Another question?
I was gonna say, I think that counts for live wood, not counting dead wood.
Correct. Dead wood you can take off anytime when you see it. Sometimes it's easier to see the dead wood in leaf than it is in the winter. Another question?
You said earlier that you never topped the tree, but is reconstruction really possible on a big tree that hasn't been pruned for a long time without doing that?
Well, when it comes to fruit trees, that rule sets over here. Because we have a whole different set of rules for production of fruit tree production. So it's not the same as a big shade tree. So you don't top shade trees. Because in actuality, if you top a shade tree as it regrows, remember that slide that showed the branch anchored down inside the trunk? When you cut a limb off a large tree, it sends out a shoot, but it's not anchored. It's weakly attached. And as it gets bigger, it gets weak, and then to get some stress on it, it's going to come down. You've created a hazard tree. And so you shorten the life of that tree. So what a fruit trees, you're always managing them down, right? So that's not going to be the issue. So this is out of the guide here as well. When you're pruning that tree, this one just shows a tree, my stick's not long enough, where you got all this growth up here, that's shading this down here, and you got all the whips growing. So you've got to be thinking about all this branching down here, getting the sunlight to that lower branching. If you took all that off, all you got is fruit way up there again. Keep your fruit down low where you can reach it. This is a espaliered pear that's been let go a little bit, and see how the branching all up here needs to get closer down into the main branching here. But see how this branch is much thinner and weak looking compared to that? Because this grows up and shades it all out. Okay, that's the point of that slide. Pears on spurs. This is a tree that's been getting more of the candelabra. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 main leaders. This is one with a central leader that maybe ought to be trained like this tree here. But see how the branching doesn't start up until about what, 3 feet? If you cut that off down, not now, it should have been cut here so you get that much more lower branching, get your scaffold branches down low. Always keep that in mind. Japanese plums, again, you got the whips, you got to manage those, take those out. And then when it comes to managing the fruit spurs where the fruit's born, remember, eventually some of those branches get old. You got a 15, 20-year-old tree, you might have to be doing some heavier pruning to rejuvenate those. So you're always thinking that in the future what your cuts are going to produce. European plums are probably the easiest. My son has an Italian plum in his front yard that he doesn't water, he doesn't prune, he doesn't do anything to, and the plums on that are just phenomenal and I've got one that I water and I prune and I don't get near the production. What's going on there? Not fair. Sometimes neglect, sometimes we over water, fertilizer, fruit trees, and that encourages lots of growth, but you don't want a lot of growth. You want what? Fruit, especially Italian plums. The more you stress at Italian plums, the happier they seem to be. Okay, this is an old apple tree, 4th year after starting some corrective pruning, you get still a lot of that growth. This person had to keep the growth up high. You know, you can see the ladders there because he had deer. How many have deer? Can you keep your branching down low with deer? Yeah, if you want to feed them. Okay. So here's a fig tree, espaliered. See how that's cut back? So in the season, that thing was just a massive foliage. So you've probably taken off 80%. So how much is too much? If you're getting fruit off that every year, is that too much? My time? Oh, I'm sorry.
I want to go back to the Italian prune. We bought one and they had it to it branches like at 5 feet.
Yeah.
Can we cut that?
Yeah, the question was, bought an Italian prune, the branching was up 5 feet. Yeah, while it's still young, cut it down where you want the branch to be. Just cut it off. As long as it's above the graft. So again, figs bearing current season growth, you're encouraging lots of good, current season growth, and so you get your figs. This is my fig tree, and so I was training these trees because I have about half a dozen resident deer. They just live in my yard. Okay, I have an acre and a half, and so I was training all these trees up so I could, keep the fruit up here. But then I put a deer fence in, so now it's too high, so I want to bring them down. So I just got through pruning these, but now I'm going to go through and take some of this major branches and cut them off and get it to resprout to get the fruit down low. And they have enough vigor at this age, I can do that with them. I did that with my cherry tree too. It's only about 4 years old. Same thing. It just they go for the stars, man. They go up like this, and so I'm just going to cut it off and get some branching down low. Okay, persimmon. They're fun to grow. Real popular in Japan. I had that tree I was talking about a little bit ago in my house in Santa Barbara. We had a Japanese family every year would come to our house, knock on the door and want to buy our persimmons. The culture, they just love persimmons. They would just drive around town. They saw a persimmon tree and they'd knock on your door. They want those persimmons. And my kids were setting up persimmon stands out there. Anyway, so you can see how much they get pruned. Same thing, current season growth. They're a beautiful tree, beautiful fall color. The fruit stays on. If you don't pick it all off, the birds will enjoy it. So they're fun plant to grow. One of my clients, he grows a lot of persimmons and he dries it, has a dryer. And he said he just keeps it in his pouch and he's working the garden and just eats it like candy. So they're great. So current season on persimmons, cherries. This is an actual orchard. One of my son's good friends, he's a cherry grower up in Mount Hood. So they do things a little differently, but they also try to keep their fruit down low for their equipment and picking and all the things. So you're going to have to, bring this down a little bit, but that's probably even a little too big for most backyards. But they bear on short spurs. They'll even produce fruit on the main trunk. Sometimes they'll flower and produce fruit way right on the main trunk. And for canker control, you'll see this in the literature. If you've got Pseudomonas, the canker that comes on cherries, you might want to do your cherry pruning in the summer. Okay? Because in the winter and the rainy season, that's how that stuff spreads. And so if you've got a real case of that and you're dealing with it, your cherries, just hold off and do all the pruning in the summer. Grapes, I know some of you said you had grapes. I see more tangled up messes with grapes. People's yards, they didn't know what to do with it. If you can get a structure like this, that's ideal. They get that cord on. But if you notice that they're cut back and you're leaving these little stubs, see it right there, there, that's last year's growth. You're leaving those little things, and off that, the new wood comes, and that's where your fruit's born. Blueberries, how many have blueberries? You know how to prune them? Most of the northern high bush, they'll get up here, 6 feet, which is probably okay. But what I see a lot of is it gets up high and the fruit gets heavy and then they just go flop, 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 flop. So you're gonna have to bring them down. If you go through an orchard or what's the blueberry orchard called? Blueberry orchard, I guess. Because grapes are vineyards and blueberry farms are blueberry farms. They're more likely to be about this high. So they're keeping those down, aren't they? And they're also thinning them out. They're taking out, what are they taking out down here? Old wood that's just kind of done its thing. And so then you get all these young ones come up and you redevelop that. But you're also going to head that back. So just like a peach, last year's wood, you're encouraging that. But if you don't thin it out, it's going to get heavy and flop over and it starts bearing fruit. And I've seen that a lot in backyard growing. So kiwis, we have one client that has a kiwi and I'll see, has us prune it every year. And I always, say, how was your fruit this year? And just to make sure we're doing it right. But it's just like a grape, except you're growing them on a different kind of structure and you're getting more of a larger cordon base out there. But the same thing, you're going to cut it back to leaving a little bit of last year's growth
out of which this year's growth will bear the fruit. So with that, any more questions? Back here.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact title, but when you have off the trunk, you have that, whatever that, what do you call that, the cap or whatever it is there?
Collar.
Right, oh yeah, the collar.
You mentioned you cut it as close, but don't cut into it.
Yeah.
What's the risk of actually coming further out from that?
I'd rather someone went too far than too in the other direction.
So is there any risk to having it out?
Well, if you're taking out something that's large, over 2 inches or so, you might want to get in and really look at it and just take a marker pin and mark it. And cut it with a handsaw so you have more control. Sometimes I was doing some chainsaw carving. I have an electric chainsaw. I love that thing. For cutting small branches. But the problem with that, if you're not a steady handed, you can nick the bark and thing. You can be careful. So a handsaw, and you just cut it right where you marked it, making sure you're on the outside of that. And maybe leave yourself, depending on the size of the branch, 1/4 to 1/2 inch. Because eventually that'll fall off or, it'll go away. If you go the other direction, you've reached that barrier and you damaged that trunk of that tree. Yeah, so you had your hand up, okay.
I discovered pruning blades for my reciprocating saw. It's
Pruning blades? Pruning blades for reciprocating saw. Yes, I've got some of those too. Yeah, those do work. Sometimes a little bulky. They have some smaller ones of Milwaukee. It's a smaller handheld one for, you can put those blades for cutting green wood, and they do work pretty good. A little safer than the chainsaw too. Let's see, back here.
You mentioned using isopropyl alcohol for sanitizing 99%. Where do you get that? Is that available?
Got it on Amazon. Yeah, 99%. Yeah. Question was, where do you get the 99% alcohol?
Got about a 25-year-old Gravenstein tree that's about 7 feet tall, but it sends up 6 or 8 foot
Whips.
every year. And I've always pruned those out in March.
Okay.
Is that, and obviously this summer I'll prune them out in the summer, but is it too soon to do that or?
Right now is the time you want to be pruning your fruit trees. January, February, March. Yeah, when they're dormant before they start budding out. We always get calls from someone late in the season, oh, I need my apple trees or something pruned, and it's like they're already budding out. Question is it too late not to do it? It's better at that point just go ahead and do it than to not do it. So if you get late, you can still do it. Yeah, let's see, over here.
Is there any danger of frost damage with winter pruning for certain trees?
Generally, no, but you can, if we get a late frost. I think our last frost date is typically said to be April 15, but that doesn't mean anything, So if you were to prune your trees and we had a warm spell and they're budding up and growing, and then all of a sudden the weather reversed and you got a hard freeze, not just a frost, but a hard freeze, you can lose some buds. I've seen that happen on kiwis. The hardy kiwis are hardy to -40, except in that scenario, because I've seen that happen where people came in and said, my kiwi just got totally fried in that cold spell. And that's weird because they're hardy to -40, not in the green, only in the dormant. So they had sprouted and that's what happened. So yes, that can happen. And it's usually an anomaly in the weather, but it can happen. Let's see.
Yeah, when you do your summer pruning, are you worried about cutting to a bud or anything like that? Or are you just kind of doing a temporary cut, cutting off what you can?
You can be pretty crude. You're not as discriminating. You want to just basically take a lot of biomass off the top, really. So you don't have to do a lot of fussing. You could even probably do with a hedge trimmer, something like that, depending on the tree. Yeah, let me go to you up here.
In rainy weather, you're not supposed to prune when it's going to be raining because you don't want to introduce like.
Question was about rainy weather. Yeah, but think about the farmer who's got to prune his orchard. If he waited for a dry day, would he get it done? Or our crews that go out and do winter pruning for people, and if we waited for a dry day, we couldn't get it done. So that's a reality. Is it
I don't think so. I don't think that's a deterrent. Maybe as a home orchardist, you can do that. You'd have the luxury to do that. It's like who wants to go out pruning a tree in the rain? And I was helping the guys prune some, actually wisteria on an arbor a couple weeks back. And then just the morning I go out to help and it's pouring rain. And I worked for a couple hours out in that, and they were out there all day. And it comes down your sleeves, down your collar. I mean, you're soaked even with a rain jacket on. You just, it's not fun. As far as the trees, I'm not sure. I know that like Pseudomonas is spread in wet conditions, but I think it's also airborne spores, that move it. And a lot of the other bacterial or fungal diseases like peach leaf curl, those tend to reside right on the wood right there. You can spread it by pruning tools, but I don't think this rain and water is going to be an issue. So I generally don't consider it to be a deterrent personally. Okay, yeah.
So when you take off suckers sometimes, I've seen, I've worked for this a lot and we cut the sucker down to the, let's say the main branch. I've seen people talk about mashing or just making a wound on that sucker cut just above the collar so that it won't sprout back. Does that make any sense?
No, not really. The question was if you cut back a whip to the main branch of kind of whacking it a couple of times or so, mashing it so it doesn't resprout. I don't think so. You're just adding more injury there. I don't see the point of that. I think it's better to manage those when it regrows. There's a thing that's called thumb pruning. Have you heard of thumb pruning? So if you're going to come back, you do this a lot on roses. Okay, you want to keep the center open, so you have the branches that are coming out, 3 to 5, they're coming out kind of a candelabra, and you cut it back, and it starts to regrow in the spring, and you got the ones coming right up in the center that you don't want. All you got to do there is just come through when the buds are about that big, just knock them out with your thumb. You'll save a ton of work down the road, and you can do that with fruit trees. You can do that with anything that you've cut back heavily, and you're trying to remanage where those branches are going to go. So you're coming back early in the season and visiting this plant. You just don't walk away for a couple of years, then see what you got. You created something. You've got to then finish that project. Back here.
So I have a couple of really big old apple trees and one of them does not taste good at all. I would like to graft new scion onto it.
Okay.
Do you think I could I'm just wondering, should I just like cut the thing to the ground and then let the new growth and then do it from there? Is that a better way to do it?
Yeah. The question was an old apple tree that's not bearing.
Well, it bears fruit, but it's very old and hasn't been taken care of in a long time. So
You could do that. You might also just consider reconstructive because maybe all your fruit spurs are spent.
Yeah.
And so you got to generate new fruit spurs. So if you cut something off, generally if you cut let's say that apple tree, it's got a limb coming out and it's got a bunch of suckers coming like this. And you decide, I'm just going to take that limb off. Take that and just lop it off. You take one of those suckers and let it just grow. And it's going to get real tall. And like the second or third year, it's going to have a ton of apples on it. And it's going to do this. It's going to come down and replace that. So that's one way to do that. That's how they do it tell you to do it in the OSU Restoring an Old Apple Tree. So that's the way to get new fruit spurs that'll produce for many, many years, because a lot of those other ones, maybe they've been producing for 15, 20, 30 years. They're done.
well, it's not like I didn't plant the tree.
Mhm.
It was there on the property. It's just not a good apple.
Well, then all the more reason either to take it out, plant something new, or if you want to have fun, try to graft. You can do a cleft graft on there. Find someone who has the wood that you want and just go to YouTube and how to do a cleft graft. And it's fun to do. And usually if you do it right, you get pretty good success rate.
Thank you.
Question over here.
Is that sort of, chopping a lot of it off? Would that work for a cherry tree? I have a very large cherry tree. And the lower branches aren't bearing as much and
Yeah.
the higher ones are far too high, even with the.
Cherries are a little different. We have come in where someone's let it go too far, cut the top out where it branches, but sometimes that's still branching too high. But cherries don't rejuvenate quite as well as an apple tree from an older tree and a trunk. You could try it. I'd be more apt to take it out, get rid of the stump and put a new cherry tree there and start
Fresh.
right. That's what I would do. Okay, question here.
Pears.
Pears?
Uh-huh. Same as apple. It's an old tree. It hasn't been taken.
Pretty much, yeah. Pears just grow a little different. They get, a lot of branches like to go vertically up this way, and you got to open them to get them to branch out in your training. But pretty much similar principles in restoring an old pear tree as an apple tree. Very similar, yeah. Question back here.
Can you weight those branches that are doing the pears that are going vertical? Can you weight them to?
You can try that, or you can just, if they get enough apples or fruit out there, it might do it themselves.
Okay.
But you can weight it with some lead or something, so.